Hey there, how you doing? Welcome to part 2 of the sculpting introductory videos. Before we kick off, can we hit 500 subscribers? We're so close. Help me do that if you enjoy my content. And yeah, in this video we're going to look at materials and scene setup. So here we are in Blender, and these are the notes I've made for the material. Like before in the, you may have seen my fantasy goblet video where I've discovered this lovely material that someone has created and shared. So I'm going to reuse that again. So I'll put a link in the description. So feel free to download that and use it. It's really handy. There it is. So I'm just going to append that to the Blender file and select it from the drop down menu for the material. So you're going to want to make some changes to this material by default. It does come out a little bit dark, but that will really depend on the scene lighting. And in fact, I actually changed this, well, particularly the absorption amount. I really ramped it down, but later I ramped it back up to 40. I believe it was 40. So bear that in mind. I did put a note in the video as I went along. And at the end of the video, you will find all of the node setups for you to pause and copy if you like. So here I am looking at the material in various lighting HDRIs. As you can see, this material node group is a group, of course. So you can enter a group and leave it just by pressing the tab key, like you would do with object and edit mode. And the only difference or change I made actually was to drag out the IOR from the principled BSDF. So you can just drag that out and plug it into the first socket, and it will be exposed on the node group just there. Makes it a little bit easier to change these values without having to go into the group, of course. So here I am playing around with some roughness variables, see what I quite like to see what works better. I mean, this can be whatever you want it to be, really. So it can be a rock, it can be a crystal, it could be a standard glass. It can be whatever you want it to be. I went for a crystal kind of look and feel. I really wanted that light beneath the sculpted object, or inside the sculpted object, to shine through, up through into the crystal, and get those lovely God rays with the volumetric scattering as well. I'll talk you through that later in the video, where I show you how I create the scene that you saw at the beginning of this video. So I'm just now adding a color ramp to the base color, and we're going to add a layer weight node as well, and connect the Fresnel to the factor. It does help to have the Node Wrangler add-on installed, by the way. It comes with Blender. Just head over to your preferences add-ons and enable it. And that way you can preview the nodes independently. So as I say, these are the notes I've made for color values and things like that. I'm just going to copy and paste these, and feel free to do the same. I want to fast forward the rest because you don't want to see watch me doing that 3 or 4 times. But you get the idea. That looks pretty cool. You get the Fresnel giving it that kind of rim light color. The color, should I say, not light. So that works really well. What I'm doing now is adding a Musgrave texture and a noise texture. I'm going to mix these two together. Control Shift, right click and drag over the 2 nodes to mix them, or simply add a mix node. So it's probably easier actually. And I'm going to add a mapping node and if I can find it, texture coordinates node. and I tend to use the object as the vector. So there's our Musgrave texture, standard default settings at the moment. Let's make some changes. I want to go with 1.68 on that one, detail all the way to 15, which is the max. Dimension of 0.16 and lacunarity 1.8. I'm sure somebody can tell me what that means. I didn't look it up. So over this noise texture, same for the detail, max 15, and the roughness just shy of 1. So whatever you like is good. So with these two together, I want to mix them. So shift, control, right drag, right mouse button drag, and that will create the mix node for you. Or just add it manually, as I say. I'm changing the method to linear light. I'm changing these slot round. You can see if you adjust the factor, that will determine the influence of the noise texture on the Musgrave texture. So that's pretty cool. I'm going to drag that into the surface roughness and see how that looks. Might be quite hard to see actually, but in certain lighting situations and angles, you should be able to see that. I think we can just make it out there actually, yeah. Yeah. I'm going to stretch it out a little bit on the Z axis, or the Z axis. It's a little bit more streaky, but not much. And that's the final node setup at this point. As I say, later on I do change the some of the values, but please do check. And there you go, just made a couple of notes there. I'll put that at the end of the video as well, so feel free to check that out. Okay, heading over to the layout workspace. Now that looks as though, because it's not a shader that we created, if you go into the viewport settings for the shader, that's actually got an alpha transparency applied to it already, as you can see there. So if you don't want it to look transparent in the viewport, just slide that back up to 1 so it matches the rest of your geometry. One other thing I'm going to do is change this displacement setting to displacement and bump. Right, with that done, let's work on the BaseSculpt object material. And then for this one, I added a gradient that went from the base of the object to the top of it. So you've got 3 different colors. Again, color ramp was used there, a gradient ramp was used there, or color ramp I should say, and mixed that with some noise as well. So we'll go through that next. Just get out of isolation mode with the / or question mark key. Okay, so let's have a look at this BaseSculpt material. I'm going to start with color ramp. This will be the base color for us. So I'm copying and pasting these from the text file and their positions. Feel free to play around with these. There's nothing right or wrong about whatever colors you want to put in here and their positions. Whatever looks good is totally fine. Let's drag that into the base color. And that's doing something, but it's not the result that we want. Just get this kind of aqua kind of color. So we need to do a little bit more work here. What I want to do, I want to separate out the Z-axis so it does it vertically in a gradient. So add in a texture coordinates and mapping nodes again. Use the object as the coordinate into the vector. Now add a separate XYZ here and then connect that up to the mapping node, because now we can split off the X, Y and Z, and we only want to use the Z-axis. So we can drag that out. But before I do that, we're also going to add a map range node. That will give us a little bit more control over the position of the gradient vertically. So let's see how this works. And a nice texture with measure. Let's also drag that mapping into the vector. Let's leave those at default for now. Let's put these two together. So Control Shift, right mouse button and drag. Create the mix node. And we'll swap that over to linear light as we did before. And perhaps I should have swapped the color 1 and color 2 slots there. But this seems to work. There you go. We now have a gradient going from the base to the top. And you can see the more I change the factor value, the more noise is introduced into the gradient. Really very cool effect. Right, let's have a look at this map range as well, because these can actually influence the position of these this color ramp. So if you wanted to bring the base color up, the bottom color further up or further down, just play around with these values. Do you find something that works for you? Good tip actually, and I forgot to mention it in the video as I was making it, was the pivot point for the object, or the origin center, should be at the base of the object for this to work better than if it was in the middle of the object. Don't know why that is, but it's just the way it works in Blender. So you can play around now with the noise texture. I've increased the detail to roughly 12 and the roughness to 0.7. If we add a little bit of distortion, it adds a little bit of organic feel to it. Then that looks very cool. So again, minor tweaks. Find something that you're happy with. Not looking too shabby. Okay. What should we do next? Let's add another noise texture. I'm changing that to 2.5, detail max to 15, and a roughness of 0.65. And distortion 1.8. I'm going to drag that into the roughness. And of course, we need to connect up our mapping and coordinates. Just like that. So if you have Node Wrangler enabled, just Control Shift and click. Control Shift, left mouse button, click the node to preview it in the viewport. Very handy. And I'm going to drop in a color ramp between the noise texture and the principled BSDF. So a little bit more control now over the roughness. And do remember that black is very shiny, a mirror finish, and white is effectively 1, so that's matte finish. So you don't want it to be pure white, you want a grey scale, and you want to lift the black so it's more in the grey scale as well. That looks very shiny, perhaps a little bit too plasticky at the moment. But it looks a bit wet, might not be a bad thing, because it looks kind of corally. So I'm just going to lift that dark grey to make it less shiny. Now at the top end, make it a little bit more matte. Find the right balance. It's not looking too bad, perhaps a little bit more. That's better. A touch more white on the top end there as well. So we do get some nice roughness working. Okay, let's go with that. Before I carry on, it's important you don't have to do this, of course. You can leave your nodes as they are. I like to group them when it gets a little bit more than a few nodes. Join them in a frame. You can give them a nice name so you know what they are. So this one is the color. So I'm going to give that the color frame name. And of course, these two are roughness. So we go back to node, join a new frame. Control J is the shortcut for that. So that's our roughness. Just bring that there. Then we're going to add a vector bump node. And plug that into the normal. I'm going to take the same output from the color. But just the noise texture, nothing, not everything. I really like the effect here. It almost looks like a Van Gogh painting, doesn't it? Heard that here, trademarked. I think that's looking really nice, but perhaps a little bit too strong, so let's turn the strength down. I normally go for around 0.1 or between 0.1 and 0.2. Generally works well. This adds another level of bumpiness to our sculpted geometry already. And finally, an ambient occlusion node. Let's connect that up as well to the mapping. Again, I did make some changes after this. I came back, I wasn't happy with it, and I came back to it later and made some additional changes to the ambient occlusion, and it worked so much better. So I do encourage you to check the end of the video where you can see the final node setups. There are timestamps in the video description, of course, so feel free to use those. So what we need to do now is mix the color with the ambient occlusion, basically. So I'm just going to copy that color ramp and plug that into the map range again. So I want to mix these two. Let's make a little bit more space on that side. Whoops. So adding a mix node. We've got those two connected now. So now it's a case of figuring out what to do with this mix node. So change it from mix to, where's multiply? There it is. You can see already we're getting this kind of, at the moment, green color being added. I turned on only local for that as well. So let's just play with the map range and see what we can do here. So it gives us a little bit more control over the ambient occlusion. Again, it's not ideal. I wasn't happy with this until I came back to it later on. But we live and learn. That's the way Blender goes. Let's try 0.15. That. And that looks terrible. We'll get there, don't you worry. It's all part of the creative process, right? Let's swap these two. That's better. If we push that slider up now, you can see the effect the ambient occlusion is having. So again, you want to go for the higher number in the higher ranges. At this point, you can play around with the colors as well. Doesn't have to be a color ramp, of course, for the ambient occlusion. It could just be a standard color. Right, let's have a look at this tentacle material, and that's going to be a copy of the BaseSculpt material. So select that one, and make sure to duplicate it before you edit it, so it's unique to the tentacles. So with that selected and applied, you can see how that looks there. We'll head over to the shading workspace, and you see the little file icon just there. That's the one you want to click to create a copy of it. So click that, and then rename it to, I don't know, Tentacle. I almost called it BaseSculpt too, but that would have been just wrong. So. Right, Tentacle it is. Let's make some changes here, because the map ranges and all these values are not going to work as well for this object. So make some minor adjustments. I want the gradient to start from around about there. And now we can see those colors really coming in now. That's better. It's looking pretty cool. Later on, I also added a bit of an emission shader to the tips of those tentacles. So, as I said before, feel free to check out the final node setups later in the video. Okay, let's have a look at those blocks that we sculpted in the first video. I want to copy the BaseSculpt material again, duplicate it again, and let's call it blocks. Right, the same principle here. You just want to adjust the parameters and the values, map range and colors and so forth. And at one point I created a very bizarre looking ambient occlusion to this as well, as you can just see there, and it became very glowy, which I really liked. It looked like a biofluorescent kind of look and feel, which would have been quite cool, but I've kept it for another time to use that. I'll just put it back as an ambient occlusion as we know it. So here I am just playing with the values now, trying to tighten up this ambient occlusion, give it a little bit more interest in the crevices. Bit more definition, I should say. Yeah, I'm just toggling on and off nodes there to see how they behave with and without them. So again, we want to play around with these map ranges to spread out the gradient in the Z-axis, so we can see more of our color range. I think that's looking not too bad. And of course you can slide up the different colors there. So I want to put it to the extreme left so I can see where the gradient is coming in. So if I turn the linear light down, the mix node down, I can see exactly where that gradient is starting, and I can increase that back up again. I'm just going to continue tweaking colors and values here and there. And let's see if I can decide on some nice colors for this. I tried a lot of various styles here for this one, like brown, greens, and light colors, dark colors. But yeah, I think I was happy with the result in the end. I'm perhaps looking for more of an organic green here. There's a slight desaturation as well. Remember, these are background objects, they're not the main object in the scene at all, so they can be quite bland looking, if that's the word I'm looking for. Doesn't have to be extravagant. I also added depth of field to the camera, so these would be even more blurred than the main object, of course, so you wouldn't see them as well as the other objects. Okay, so that's not looking too bad. I like how the ambient occlusion works on this one. It's worked very well. So here I am trying different colours, swapping out the light colour for a darker colour at the tip. Perhaps not as bright, it's colourful. Bring that into the yellow, ever so slightly. I'm just going to zoom in here and have a look at this ambient occlusion again. This is great when you play around with these types of blending modes. This is where I stumbled across the bioluminescence effect, which was very cool. I don't think I kept it in the video. Maybe I did, but if I did, you'll see it in a second. So find out. And basically, don't be kind of put off by changing these values and changing options, and see what happens. That's a great way to learn, and failure is always an option. Remember that. It's a great teacher. Well, that got a bit deep. Sorry about that. Okay, let's. There we go. Divide. Look at that. It's oozing fluorescent stuff. Look at that. That looks really cool. Maybe I should have tried that, but I didn't. And I decided to go with blocks 2, so I kept a copy of the other one just there. So I really liked it. But I did want to go for more of a darker, traditional ambient occlusion, so I pulled it back to something a bit more boring. Because it is background, remember. That looks pretty good. I do like the glowing version though, I do. There we go, look at that. It's amazing. Very halo, probably. So the scene, very straightforward, although it's fiddly. Not too fiddly, it's just adding layers and layers of, you know, I want some volume scatter, add a few lights. Most of it's just composition. So placing things in the background, adding depth of field to the camera, changing the focal length of the camera. I think I changed it about 3 times before I settled on the one you saw in the video. So I really wanted to get the base sculpt. And this video is about sculpting. I didn't want the background to be a thing. So I wanted a shorter field of view. Or focal point, I should say. So in typical Beyond Blender fashion, I'm going to add a plane axis, and that is going to be the target for the camera to look at. So we just reset the camera a little bit. I like to split into 2 windows here, one for the camera view and and one for just a general 3D viewport. So that way I can see what the camera is doing without any interruptions. Let's position the camera 0 on the x-axis, so it's facing straight ahead. You can see there as I move the camera, it's always pointing at the camera look at empty, which I'm just moving there. So that's your target for the camera. I think I tried 35mm initially, then changed it again later and back again to a short lens field of view. Again, this is trial and error, trying to find the right angle. I made minor adjustments to the crystal, so I select the parent cube, which we did in the last video, and just resize that a few times to get it to fit into the viewport mainly. So here I am, adding these blocks. And the reason they're rotating in this weird way is because I've also targeted them to look at an empty. Is that way I can get this kind of random positioning and so on. So at this point, at one point I added a cube which will have a volume scatter node applied to it. That will introduce the scattering atmospheric look, which really helps disperse the lights and create those God rays that I was hoping to get. Now by default the density is very high, set to 1. So lower that to a very low number. 0.02, 0.01, something like that. Tends to work quite well. So as you can see, it's quite subtle. Looking a little bit bland right now. You can see as I move the box in and out, that changes the scene. And for the box itself, we want to change that to bounds so that we can actually see through the box as well. So here's the scene. Basically that bit there is the crystal effectively. I've just copied the crystal and I've just scaled it up and down. And that's what those little pebbles are around the crystal, and these parts you can see around the BaseSculpt. I thought that worked quite well. And I added a gobo effect, and a gobo is effectively something that blocks light. So as that animates across, very simple keyframes, as it animates across from left to right, obviously the light passes through that and the light is blocking some of the light, and you get some shadows. And this is the final material I used for the BaseSculpt. You can see the ambient occlusion looks very different to the original version you saw earlier on in the video. And on this one is the bit where I added some of the emission to the tip of the tentacles. You can see there we've got an emission, which is the color ramp we created earlier. And you can see that later on in the node setups. And the absorption amount I changed to 40, and the IOR as well. And the blocks, I tweaked the colors a little bit more. That's the proper ambient occlusion setup, which I should have done in the first place. And yeah, feel free to play with these and add some colors that you like. Here's the advanced glass material for now. And the blocks too. The BaseSculpt. And the values. So, and the tentacle, of course. So the scene consists of various lights, a spotlight mainly in the foreground, various point lights and area lights, just a couple, I think just one area light, to add some like atmospheric lighting like at the base. So you've got a key light and you've got some side lights to add some more colour. As you can see there, you've got a warm colour on the left side and an aqua turquoise light on the right hand side. gives it some nice contrast. And the camera animations are actually using 2 cameras. And I did create a video on how to animate camera cuts. So if you want to know how to do that, head over to that video after this one and check that out. It's a very easy technique to actually do, using these little markers in the timeline you can see there. So you create the markers and assign the camera to those markers. Like I say, check the video out anyway, I'll put it in the description. So very straightforward animation. I think it works quite well. I've animated the depth of field as well. So the depth of field has got a target as well, as the camera has. So I can shift the focal plane as the camera animates. So that's the scene in a nutshell. Lots of duplication of the blocks, duplicate links by the way, resizing them, scaling them, moving them around, as you do. Really wanted to get a close-up of the base sculpt. You can see how the scene looks in the viewport there, in rendered mode. Very atmospheric, very cool. So keep it simple when it comes to scene setups. You can see the light there under the crystal inside the base sculpt, which lights up the crystal very well. Yeah, as you can see, not too complicated. It's just a little bit fiddly, placing the blocks in the background and keeping an eye on the camera perspective as well. The camera angle to make sure you get a good composition. So here are the final materials. Right, that's it. Thanks for watching everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. And if you liked my video, like and subscribe. Let's hit that 500 subscribers. That would be amazing. Thank you so much. See you next time.